What happens when the young leader of a nation facing internal chaos takes a controversial decision that could change everything? Does reinstating the death penalty solve Burkina Faso's problems, or does it risk tearing the country apart? It's a question so loaded, you can't look away. Now, let us tell you why Burkina Faso is the country to watch right now. A crossroads is an understatement. This is a nation fighting for its soul. With decades of exploitation and betrayal in its rearview mirror and a leader who just might shake the global order, the stakes have never been higher. But to understand where this is heading, you need to know how it started and why every decision Burkina Faso makes is a fight for survival. Let's get started. If you think betrayal is a modern trend in Burkina Faso, think again. This nation's story is one long series of backstabs, coups, and broken promises, starting with its so-called independence in 1960. On the surface, France's departure marked the end of colonial rule, but beneath the celebratory rhetoric lay a reality that was anything but free. France may have physically left, but its fingerprints remained all over the country's economy, politics, and even its sovereignty. One of the starkest symbols of this lingering control was the CFA franc, the currency Burkina Faso was forced to adopt. The CFA, still printed in Paris, wasn't just money, it was a leash. It dictated how Burkina Faso could trade, spend, and grow, ensuring the former colony stayed firmly within France's economic orbit. The country's wealth, labor, and resources continued to flow outward, enriching foreign powers while leaving its people in poverty. Independence, as it turned out, was little more than a rebranding exercise for colonialism. But then came a spark of hope. Enter Thomas Sankara, a revolutionary leader who refused to play by colonial rules. When he took power in 1983, he brought with him a vision so bold it rattled not just his enemies, but the very foundations of neo-colonialism. Sankara didn't just want independence on paper. He wanted his people to reclaim their dignity, identity, and future. His policies were radical, rejecting foreign aid outright, a move that shocked both his allies and adversaries. To Sankara, aid wasn't a lifeline. It was a weapon of control, a carrot dangled by global powers to keep African nations dependent. Sankara's vision wasn't limited to economics. It was cultural and psychological. He urged his people to embrace local agriculture, wear clothes made in Burkina Faso, and take pride in their heritage. "We must dare to invent the future," he declared, calling for an Africa that was no longer shackled by its colonial past. His leadership inspired not just Burkina Faso, but an entire continent, with many viewing him as a modern-day Pan-African hero. But no revolution is without enemies. Sankara's policies, while popular among his people, made him a target for powerful foreign interests that thrived on Africa's exploitation. His greatest adversary, however, was someone much closer to home: Blaise Compaoré, his trusted ally and second-in-command. Compaoré, backed by foreign powers, unhappy with Sankara's anti-looting policies, betrayed him in the most brutal way possible. In 1987, Compaoré orchestrated a coup, assassinating Sankara and seizing power. It was a turning point that plunged Burkina Faso into a dark era. Under Compaoré's rule, fear replaced hope. The death penalty, abolished decades later, became a tool not of justice but of terror. It was used to silence dissent, punish rivals, and send a clear message: betray the regime and you'll pay with your life. The country's last execution in 1988 wasn't just a legal punishment, it was a political spectacle designed to cement Compaoré's authority. Fast forward to 2018, and Burkina Faso made the bold move to abolish the death penalty. It was a decision that aligned the country with global calls for more humane justice systems, signaling progress and reform. Yet, in a nation where betrayal, coups, and instability have been the norm, the removal of such a severe deterrent came with risks. Could the country maintain order without it? Could its justice system handle the challenges of modern governance? These questions, unresolved then, are now at the heart of a heated national debate. As the current government under Ibrahim Traore considers reinstating the death penalty, the stakes couldn't be higher. Is it a necessary tool to deter treason and stabilize the nation? or a return to the dark days of political oppression.
The Burkina Faso want to reinstate death penalty. The government says they're considering the move after the capital punishment was abolished in a West African country in 2018.
The death penalty in Burkina Faso isn't just a legal issue. It's a moral, political, and practical quagmire that has the nation at a crossroads. It's a debate that goes beyond borders, touching on the complexities of governance, justice, and human rights across Africa. For a nation steeped in historical betrayals and political instability, the question of whether to reinstate capital punishment is as divisive as it is urgent. To see why this is such a contentious issue, look at the broader African context. Take South Africa, for instance. In the aftermath of apartheid, the country abolished the death penalty, a move hailed globally as a progressive step toward justice and equality. The decision was rooted in the belief that state-sanctioned executions were a relic of an oppressive regime that dehumanized its citizens. For a nation trying to heal deep wounds, abandoning the death penalty was a statement, a rejection of the brutality that had defined its past. But idealism often clashes with reality. Despite the global applause, South Africa soon found itself grappling with one of the highest crime rates in the world. Cities like Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban became synonymous with violent crime, from armed robberies to murders. Critics argue that the absence of severe consequences, such as the death penalty, emboldened criminals who no longer feared the justice system. The streets may no longer see the shadow of apartheid, but for many South Africans, the shadow of violence remains ever present. Now flip the coin and look at Egypt. Here, the death penalty is not only retained but applied liberally, particularly in cases of terrorism and national security. To supporters, it's a necessary tool in a volatile region plagued by extremism and political instability. They argue that the fear of ultimate punishment deters would-be offenders and reassures citizens that the state is in control. Yet, the flip side is hard to ignore. A justice system that wields capital punishment too freely risks becoming a weapon for silencing dissent and targeting political opponents. Critics warn that in such environments, the death penalty often serves as a mask for oppression, not justice. So, where does Burkina Faso fit into this spectrum? For a nation still reeling from years of betrayal, coups, and foreign interference, reinstating the death penalty is a step fraught with challenges. Its justice system, like many others in Africa, is far from flawless. Instances of wrongful convictions, political interference, and inadequate resources to ensure fair trials are not uncommon. The fear is palpable. Could a reinstated death penalty end up punishing the innocent or being used as a tool for political expediency? Ibrahim Traore's government, however, insists that the measure would only target the most heinous offenders, the worst of the worst. These include traitors, terrorists, and individuals responsible for acts that destabilize the nation. Traore's argument is rooted in pragmatism. In a country facing existential threats, harsh measures may be the only way to maintain order. For him, the death penalty isn't about vengeance, it's about survival. And then there's the international angle. Reinstating the death penalty would almost certainly draw condemnation from human rights organizations and Western nations. Burkina Faso would likely face accusations of regressing on human rights and jeopardizing its democratic credentials. Yet, Traore has already demonstrated that he isn't afraid to defy international norms, especially when it comes to standing up to Western powers. His bold stance against French influence and his pivot toward new alliances have already drawn global scrutiny, but they've also solidified his image as a leader, unwilling to compromise on his nation's sovereignty. Still, the question remains, is the death penalty truly a solution, or is it a dangerous gamble? And how will this risky decision impact Africa? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. This isn't just Burkina Faso's fight. It's a symbol of a broader African narrative, a continent wrestling to shake off centuries of exploitation, dependency, and systemic control. For decades, Africa has been painted as a resource-rich playground for foreign powers, a place where independence is celebrated in name but often stifled in practice. Burkina Faso, under the leadership of Ibrahim Traore, is boldly challenging this narrative. His defiance of France, embrace of new alliances, and commitment to local development aren't just acts of governance. They're revolutionary moves that resonate across Africa. But in a world where African sovereignty is often met with resistance, these bold moves make him a target. By expelling French troops and redefining Burkina Faso's alliances, Traore has taken a stand that few African leaders have dared to take. His actions challenge the status quo, asserting that African nations are capable of determining their futures without foreign interference. But such defiance doesn't come without consequences. Western powers, particularly France, are unlikely to sit idly by while their influence is diminished. Traore's leadership has already drawn criticism from Western media, which portrays him as reckless and impulsive. This narrative is eerily similar to the smear campaigns once used against Thomas Sankara, a revolutionary whose policies threatened the same entrenched systems Traore is now challenging. But the challenges Traore faces go beyond external forces. Burkina Faso is also grappling with internal threats, including jihadist groups that thrive on instability. These groups are not just opportunistic, they're strategic, exploiting the cracks created by years of political turmoil and foreign interference. Every coup attempt, every act of betrayal, and every external meddling creates fertile ground for extremists to expand their influence. For Traore, the stakes are clear. He's not just fighting to lead a nation, he's fighting to protect its existence. This is where the debate over the death penalty takes center stage. For Traore, reinstating capital punishment isn't just about justice. It's about drawing a line in the sand. It's a statement to those who seek to destabilize the country. Betrayal and treason will not be tolerated. To many Africans, this stance isn't just about Burkina Faso. It's about standing up to a system that has long exploited the continent. The West's criticism of the death penalty often rings hollow in Africa, where the focus is on survival, stability, and reclaiming sovereignty from systems designed to suppress it. Critics in the West may decry the move as a step backward, but Traore has made it clear that he isn't interested in Western approval. His focus is on protecting his people and advancing the vision of a truly independent Africa. For Burkina Faso, this isn't just about internal stability. It's about rejecting the idea that Africa must conform to Western ideals to be legitimate. The continent's realities, challenges, and aspirations are unique, and its solutions must be too. At its core, Burkina Faso's fight is Africa's fight. It's a call for a future where African nations define their paths, free from the shackles of exploitation and dependency. Traore's actions, bold as they are, reflect a growing sentiment across the continent. The days of bowing to foreign interests are over, whether it's through redefining alliances, reclaiming resources, or implementing controversial policies like the death penalty. Burkina Faso is sending a clear message. Africa's sovereignty is non-negotiable. Here the question is, why do the West want Africa and the whole world to do what they think is right? The West's insistence on having Africa and the rest of the world conform to its ideals and standards is a complex mix of historical dominance, economic self-interest, cultural superiority, and geopolitical strategy. It stems from a long-standing mindset that views Western systems as inherently superior, coupled with a need to protect its global dominance in an increasingly multipolar world. The roots of the West's influence over Africa trace back to the colonial era. During this period, European powers divided the continent among themselves, imposing their systems of governance, justice, and economy. The colonizers dismantled traditional African structures, replacing them with Western frameworks designed to serve their interests. Even after decolonization, this legacy persisted. African nations, left with borders arbitrarily drawn by colonizers and economies tied to Western trade networks, found themselves trapped in systems that ensured dependency. The West's insistence on Africa following its path is a continuation of this mindset, a belief that Africa's progress must align with the Western expectations, ignoring the continent's own aspirations and cultural realities. This colonial hangover is not limited to Africa. Across the globe, former colonies are often expected to mirror Western systems. This expectation disregards the fact that these regions have unique histories, cultures, and challenges that may not fit neatly into Western models of governance or development. At the heart of the West's desire for Africa to follow its lead is the continent's vast wealth of natural resources. From gold, diamonds, and rare earth minerals to oil and fertile agricultural land, Africa holds the keys to powering global industries and economies. Western nations and corporations have long relied on these resources to fuel their growth. To maintain access to these riches, the West often advocates policies that align with its economic interests. Free market systems, privatization, and foreign investment are pushed as solutions for African development. But these policies often favor Western corporations, allowing them to extract wealth while local populations see little benefit. For instance, Western-backed mining contracts often ensure profits flow outward, leaving African governments with a fraction of the wealth generated. When leaders like Ibrahim Traore push back against these arrangements, advocating for local control over resources, they threaten this system of exploitation. The West's calls for reform and good governance are often thinly veiled attempts to protect its economic interests under the guise of promoting stability. Africa's importance goes beyond its resources. The continent's strategic position, situated between major trade routes, with growing influence in international organizations, makes it a key player in global geopolitics. The West understands this and seeks to maintain control by ensuring African nations align with its vision. The rise of other global powers, particularly China and Russia, has intensified this dynamic. Both nations have deepened their relationships with Africa, offering alternatives to Western influence. China's investments in infrastructure and Russia's security partnerships have gained traction, appealing to African leaders who view Western aid and policies as restrictive. For the West, this shift is alarming. It undermines decades of dominance and challenges its narrative of being the world's moral and economic leader. By insisting that African nations follow Western ideals, whether through governance reforms, military partnerships, or economic policies, the West seeks to counter these rising influences and maintain its grip on the continent. At the core of the West's insistence is a belief in the superiority of its culture, values, and systems. This cultural arrogance has roots in the colonial era, where European powers justified their conquest of Africa by portraying themselves as civilizing forces. Today, this mindset manifests in the expectation that African nations should emulate Western democracies, adopt Western judicial systems, and follow Western approaches to human rights. This belief often ignores Africa's rich cultural and governance traditions, which have existed for centuries and are often better suited to local realities. For example, traditional African conflict resolution mechanisms, such as restorative justice, focus on community healing rather than punitive measures. Yet, these systems are often dismissed as backward because they don't align with Western norms. The West's cultural supremacy also extends to its portrayal of African leaders. Figures like Thomas Sankara and now Ibrahim Traore are often demonized in Western media as reckless or authoritarian for rejecting Western ideals. This narrative conveniently ignores the fact that these leaders advocate for policies rooted in African self-reliance and sovereignty. The global order is shifting, and the West knows it. The rise of powers like China, India, and Russia has created a multipolar world where the West's dominance is no longer guaranteed. Africa, with its growing economies, young population, and strategic importance, is a key battleground in this struggle. The West's push for Africa to follow its lead is driven by a fear of losing influence. By dictating terms, whether through trade agreements, aid packages, or diplomatic pressure, the West tries to keep Africa within its sphere of control. However, this approach is increasingly being rejected by African leaders who see through the facade. Leaders like Traore are part of a broader movement challenging Western dominance. Their actions, cutting ties with former colonizers, reclaiming resources, and forging new alliances, represent a shift in Africa's relationship with the world. The West's insistence on conformity is a reaction to this shift, an attempt to reassert control in a world where its influence is waning. One of the most effective tools the West uses to enforce its vision is foreign aid. On the surface, aid is presented as a gesture of goodwill, aimed at fostering development and stability. But in reality, it often comes with strings attached. conditions that require African nations to adopt Western policies and systems. These conditions can range from privatizing industries to implementing specific governance reforms. While such measures are framed as beneficial, they often prioritize Western interests over local needs. For example, privatization may attract foreign investors, but it can also strip nations of control over critical resources and services. The West's use of aid as leverage perpetuates dependency. African nations that reject these conditions risk losing funding, which can destabilize their economies. This creates a cycle where the West's vision becomes the default, not because it's the best solution, but because rejecting it comes with dire consequences. Underlying the West's actions is a savior complex, a belief that Africa needs Western intervention to progress. This narrative positions the West as a benevolent force, swooping in to solve Africa's problems. While this framing may appeal to Western audiences, it undermines Africa's agency and ignores the continent's capacity to address its challenges. This complex is evident in the West's approach to issues like governance and human rights. Rather than supporting African-led solutions, the West often imposes its models, dismissing local knowledge and expertise. This paternalistic attitude reinforces the idea that Africa cannot succeed without Western guidance, perpetuating a cycle of dependency. But the reality is changing, and now Africa will make decisions that would be better for its benefit. What do you think? Is the death penalty a necessary step for a nation like Burkina Faso, or is it a dangerous gamble? Let us know in the comment section. Do you think West deserves to say anything about this matter? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.